those who are involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening, roomies, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I am your host, Brooks Bigley, and with me tonight is Ian A. Bain, the author of Season 4, Episode 5, entitled Invasive. How are you this evening, Ian?
I'm doing well. How are you, Brooks?
I'm doing okay. I'm currently inside a home with green plants, not purple plants, so I'm feeling pretty safe in the moment. What's your current plant situation over there?
Our house is filled. There are vines growing across the mantles and around the living room, which is a nice contrast because everything outside the window is white and frozen.
Okay, so you've got that snow condition hitting you as well. Where are you located, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm in Muskoka, Ontario. So we're about 2 to 3 hours north of Toronto. So we're not getting the cold snap that's hitting kind of Western Canada right now. We're more towards the east.
Okay, so there's different variations of snow within Canada.
There are, yes. We're about minus 13 here right now, whereas out in Alberta, they're below minus 30 right now. So this is quite balmy in comparison.
It's warm for you, yeah, exactly. You should put on some shorts and go for a jog later. Well, we're here to talk about this beautiful story that you wrote. Man, I was very excited to get to this because this was that slow burn that I've been waiting for this season for us to put out. Your story, just like a vine, grows every time that you listen to it again or read it again, and more parts get filled in, and it's really just a slow, chilling tale of this woman returning back to her roots, literally. Oh man, we can make plant puns all day, I suppose. But your story was such an interesting arc of this, she wasn't facing her own demons. It almost felt like she was facing other people's demons. Man, very, very rich with so many themes I want to get into here.
Yeah, absolutely.
What precipitated this? What was the seed that began to grow for this story for you?
Yeah, so there's a number of things. I've just found myself completely obsessed with all things plant horror. It's just something that I have gravitated towards for quite some time. And this story specifically, I kind of, again, got the seed for at the beginning of the pandemic. So where I live is very much cottage country, so tourism is very much the main industry here. And at the initial COVID lockdowns, almost 2 years ago now, it was really quite evident, what people are willing to put up with in order to get those tourism dollars. So I wanted to create a story where I took that to the extreme. If you have these people who are isolated, their livelihood is dependent on this one, this single industry. And so what would you be willing to do to continue living where you might have grown up or living where you love? So, so I just kind of took that idea and I decided to set it sort of East Coast. I really like the kind of isolated geography, and I've always just been in love with Eastern Canada. It's such a lovely place to visit. So, I created a story that turned it into something horrifying.
It was so believable, too, because this is just kind of this happens all the time to towns throughout centuries in any country, really, that something can be prosperous because of a local resource, right? And then the economy there, that local economy is based on that, and so everyone flourishes and everyone grows. Man, we're going to be making a lot of puns tonight. Everyone flourishes and blooms, with that kind of atmosphere. But you take that one thing away, and there's no more stability. And
Exactly.
so with your story, like when the townspeople get together for the meeting, there's multiple flashbacks, as our narrator goes through, the story. And when she's thinking about that meeting, where like the one politician's like, we gotta wait for the scientists to figure this out first. And then, everyone's like, no, tourism, it's bringing it back. Everyone just was like ready to just latch on to that next thing. And now these pods, these vines, these purple anomalies are the next big thing now. Now that's the economy. But it's clearly doing something terrible to the town and to the people. And as we find out later in the story, had already like killed some people, I guess, by the point they're having this meeting. We just don't know that because of the order, I guess, in the story's told. But definitely an important theme of like that tragedy of just the desperation of like, well, this didn't work and we need to survive. So fuck, we'll do anything. And then jumping on to the next thing, and it's clearly hurting the town. Like, how did you determine? You're saying like COVID was something that helped precipitate that, but like that gives me ideas about like society in general and us railing against capitalism. All kinds of different things kind of spring out from this story. So like, did you have unintended themes going, or were you really calculated about thinking this through?
Like that initial idea, thematically, like I said, taking sort of that idea of what would you do to, keep this town afloat to the extremes, like that really did drive the story. And most of the times in things that I write, I like the themes to come out a little bit more, and again, another plant pun, a little bit more organically. But this time I really, I had a set message, a set theme that I wanted to explore. And like, this isn't something that is new, like you were saying. This has been happening as long as there's been people, especially in an area where everyone's dependent on, one specific thing. And a lot of the small towns that I grew up in, this has always been a big issue, whether it's a factory that drives the local town's economy, that factory shuts down, and that kind of destroys the town. Or, with this story, looking at a tourism industry collapsing.
Yeah, you did a great job at framing, I don't want to say the misery, because there still was this sense of, well, we got to overcome this now, and our narrator kind of, shed some light on that, the people decided we made it through the worst of it, we can put up with a little bit of a plant stench. And so it's almost like the normalizing of even knowing, because I like how it's like the truth is right there, and they're all just choosing to be blind to it because this is now the new thing saving the town, even though it's making the town worse in the long run. And so that was like, it's even a different theme, I felt like, of us just being accepting as humans of maybe some shit going on around us, like this apathy of just, this is what it is. You mentioned or in the story, our narrator mentions that tourists were just setting their cups down at the cafe around the vines, like they didn't even notice. But I didn't feel like you were insinuating that they were invisible. It was just so normalized. This is what it is. And you would think a town would be like pitchforks running around trying to just get rid of everything, that the town would be fighting back, like you would think a true horror story would be like, oh, here comes the pods, and now the town is railing, to go against it. And no, you flipped it, and you're just like, it just, what's the name of the story? Invasive. It just slowly worked its way into the town, and the town just slowly accepted it. And I like how you went back and forth with the flashbacks again, because you do realize, in one of the flashbacks at the beginning, when Joe calls up her narrator and she goes down to the beach, they clearly are understanding now that these things are murdering people. And yet still at the town meeting, they're not like, we should probably do something to get rid of these things. So just that like apathy, it's not even hopelessness really. It's just the apathy of what's going on around you. I can see that translating COVID, specifically, like my own opinions here now too. COVID worming its way into it didn't just hit one day, it slowly and then got bigger, and then it was evident, and then we all knew about it. It took hold, and we've normalized masks. We've normalized this sense of like, no, let's stay in tonight instead of how many things can we go visit this weekend?
Yeah.
There's just a different society is completely. Not apathy per se, but just normalizing it, letting it get into us. And now it's the vines of COVID are all around us, performing with us now in our new lives. Whew, man, your story.
No, I'm glad that landed. I think the way that you phrased it is normalizing of something otherwise abnormal. There's a fantastic book called The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson. It's a horror novel from the 70s. I only found out about it through Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell. And it was very much a similar idea where this auctioneer moves into this small town, and it's very slow and it's very insidious, but he eventually sort of takes over this small town and just these things that people might normally disagree with and fight back against because he was so insidious. They were willing to put up with it. And I kind of thought, well, what is something very insidious and creeping? Plant life. We think about it eroding different things. So I thought that would work quite well.
Yeah, there's but there's more than one allegory that you can pull from your story. And that's why I was almost like, wow, did you simultaneously come up with these 4 themes to jam into your story? But that's the beauty of your story, is that because of how I think how it did land, how we can connect to it so much better, that it is a source of material that can allow one to fit it how they want to a perspective. Like I'm saying, I can find 4 themes. Maybe someone else can only find the single theme that you intended. But to think that from your creation, you can kind of be like, oh, and then I see this message here. I pull this. That shows the power of your words. It shows the power of your storytelling. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That's a great compliment. And yeah, I always love stories where there isn't just one right answer. There are, so many different readings that we can take away from something.
Especially lately, with this show, with the Grey Rooms, in season 3 and now 4, I think we've done a little better job at picking those stories. I've said this many times, not just an ambiguous ending, but more of like an open-ended, like it could be this or this. Instead of it being like, oh, fuck, I have no idea. I don't understand how this story ended. Well, I don't get it. It's more like, oh my God, it could be this or this or this. That's the excitement. It carries the story with you after you're no longer listening to the story. So it's perfect, I think, when a writer achieves that. And we've been finding that in our stories that we've been getting in submissions. I remember season 1 and 2, it's just like, just kill the guy. Just boom. This happened. Boom. They're dead. Okay. And then there could be some substance, but still it was just like get from here to point A to point B. And with your story, I almost forgot we were going towards point B. It was just such a beautiful journey through. What did you think of listening to the story?
Oh, I was blown away. The standout is all of the acting was so fantastic, but the standout was the Foley work. Those sound effects when the plants are moving, and there's a bit of gore. Obviously, we can't see it, and so those sound effects just, took my breath away at certain points. I completely forgot that I was listening to a story that I had already. I knew where it was going, but that was fantastic.
Yeah, Jason is something else. We're hearing episode 5 now. You're episode 5 in our season, but he's already working currently on producing episodes way past that, right? So we've already got several other episodes, basically being ready to package. So he's already evolved past what he's making here. So it's always funny to me, like a couple episodes ago, someone else said the same thing about like the ambiance and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, Jason's doing even better this season. But it's like I have to stifle it because it's like I already know he's doing even better than what we're currently talking about because he's already that far ahead working on stuff. So yeah, setting that scene of getting you lost, you're closing your eyes. You're not using your eyeballs when you listen to a podcast. You're using your earballs. And so there's a difference between just slapping a dude talking here and then over there versus really immersively designing that wall of sound to deliver the story to your ears. And Jason just knows how to wrap you in the scene so that you close your eyes and you have your earbuds and listening. You're like, wait, am I in the room with these characters as this is happening? Yeah. That is the beauty of podcasts. Oh, I love it. Yeah. Do you listen to a bunch of other podcasts? Are you familiar with other audio dramas?
Yeah. So I think The Grey Rooms is sort of the only podcast I've listened to where there's, one narrative thread that ties everything together. I also love lots of one-offs. So obviously the No Sleep podcast. So hearing David Cummings on this episode, that was pretty cool.
I was just going to say, did you notice who all the actors were?
Yeah, no, I before I even saw his name on the credits, I was like, oh, that voice is very familiar. I think I've listened to it about once a week for a couple of years now. Yeah, so that was super cool because I love what they've been doing with the No Sleep podcast for years now. And then Pseudopod is also fantastic. Tales to Terrify is a great one too. But what I love about No Sleep and The Grey Rooms is that both of your podcasts really treat it as an audio drama, right? It's not just someone reading a story, which can be fantastic on its own, but there's just that added layer of the sound effects, the different character voices that really draw you in. And it just feels like such an immersive experience.
Yeah. And I know what you mean that like Tales to Terrify I'm familiar with. More of a narration themed type of storytelling, just a single character, one actor basically just recanting a story, telling the story, like as though they were sitting there reading it from a book. And that's a lot of fun to listen to. But when, you can take an audio drama, but make it horror, which is fantastic because horror always allows you to explore those things that maybe people would otherwise be like, I don't really want to read about that topic. But you add horror to it. They're like, shoot, teach me anything. Put horror into it. So I love that horror reaches society.
Yeah, totally. And like the difference between a narrator saying the vines were creeping across the floor versus hearing those sound effects that Jason comes up with.
Yeah.
They're really almost talk about them as different mediums.
Because there's a sense of needing to explain a character's movements, let's say, in a story. And if you're narrating, a single character, whatnot, you could just say, and then I stood up, and then I walked across the room to hand this to this, to put this on the shelf. But in a podcast, in an audio drama in a podcast, you definitely can't have, it would get very redundant to have your narrator be like, and then I stood up, and then you hear walking, and then I put it on the shelf, and then you hear it on the shelf. Like that'd be redundant. So you come up with clever ways that maybe the character says, I noticed the spot on the shelf to put the book. And then you hear the chair pull out, and then the quack, 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 quack towards the bookshelf, and then the book going onto the bookshelf, right? So same exact scene, but delivered in a different medium, yeah. And JM's music too. His music was so the bed to hold the plant, I guess.
No, but it was like perfect for setting the tone and the atmosphere going into the different sections of the story. That immediately just like put you in the right frame of mind for what you were about to listen to. I thought that was fantastic too. And I was a little bit worried when I was thinking about sending this off that is saying Canadian maritime accent in my script notes, is that going to be too specific? But I thought they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, well, David Cummings and Graham and Jeff Clement, they're all from Los Angeles, born and raised, and so they do a really good job at acting as Canadians. I'm totally kidding because they're all from Canada. But yeah, it was Graham was really excited, I think, about the casting for this, just because it was like, oh, we can totally get these people in on this to really handle this properly for your setting. You didn't want someone like me being like, yeah, it's about time, eh? Like, I would bastardize a story, not being a true Canadian. I really was born and raised in California, so I'm an American voice. All right, that's horrible to say because you're American too. I'm a United States voice. Anyways, I don't know what is an American accent. Everybody here has accents, so it's all of us. But yes, for setting, it was really cool to hear them perform that way. It really, again, just another way to sell the story and just get you lost, in the immersion of all of it. And I don't know if you follow, on social media, but Cassie, doing our artwork, she's like the silent hero of everything, because if you don't follow us on social media, I don't know how else you'd see the artwork. And to me, artwork is always important because it's a visual aid to the podcast. But like the artwork for Invasive of her, I don't think the plants were purple originally per se. She had to make them that way, but it was so gorgeously done. And then all the accompanying pictures and stuff that we do, for our social medias. People are like, oh, this is dope. This is beautiful.
Oh, that cover art absolutely took my breath away. Yeah, I got to see it a couple months in advance, and she did a fantastic job on that. Just, the purple plants climbing on that brick building, like, it seems like such an innocuous image at first, but
yeah, it was just part of it.
Yeah, but there's just something that you're like, that's wrong. Like, right,
because they're purple. They're that deep shade of purple. Something is off. There's a reason why they're purple. Yeah, totally. I always have actually wondered. I've never actually asked. Like, I suppose, let's say a band goes out there and they make their first album, and then, well, someone's got to design the cover for that album. So then, boom, they all see that initial cover and like, what do they think? And then here we are 30, 40, 50 years later, classic albums still have that same cover. But that cover was brand new to an artist at one point. What did that artist think? I've never asked like our authors, like, what did you think? You wrote the story. You haven't heard it yet. Boom, you first see that art. What did you think? Yeah, it's cool. I'm glad that you liked it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in terms of your writing, do you write a bunch of different horror stories? Do you do fan? Like, what is your genre of writing? How did you get into writing?
Okay, big question. Yeah, I guess I've always written just from a young age. I didn't start seriously writing until about 2017. My wife and I, after we graduated from teachers college, we moved over to England, and we taught in Leeds. It's kind of northern England. And she just kind of encouraged me. She knew that I wrote for fun. She encouraged me to start submitting my work, and just kind of went from there. And the horror aspect just comes naturally. Our dad growing up would always tell us stories that were probably way inappropriate for little kids to listen to in terms of how terrifying they were and how gory they were. And I grew up in a small town, and we grew up literally in the woods, and there was one cemetery right beside our house, and it was this small stone cemetery in the woods. But then also there were just gravestones littered throughout this forest.
How close did you live to all this?
Like the stone, the kind of nice cemetery I could see from my bedroom window.
Oh, and then, what a beautiful childhood.
I know. And behind that was a swamp and a small creek.
Oh, it gets better.
Yeah, and then just littered throughout this forest was our property. You would just be walking along and you could stumble over a headstone, and it was just a childhood hobby that we would go with charcoal and find out who these dead bodies were. And one kind of morbid story, but I thought it was super cool. I would have been about 8, and there was this sand hill on our property, and I knew that there was a gravestone on top of the sand hill. And one day, our dog was digging at something in the sand and came up with a bone, and then discovered the entire body, because obviously older graves, they weren't encased in any sort of concrete or anything, so all these bones started popping up. That was really fun for an 8-year-old to discover as some human remains. But yeah, that definitely I think adds to some of my morbid sensibilities.
Well, and as we were talking about earlier, you kind of were normalized. I feel like you would have learned to just not be afraid of things. So this would just make you a better horror writer. Or actually, I've heard it put that if you are not afraid of things, you can write better horror. And then the counter argument was, well, no, you need to be afraid of a lot of things because you use that fear to write your horror stories. But then the person saying, no, you have to have none. They were winning somehow in this battle.
Yeah, that might even be the difference between like an extreme horror writer versus a quiet horror writer. I was an extremely terrified kid growing up. Gross stuff didn't bother me too much. We raised chickens, so regular trips to the slaughterhouse. But I was terrified of like the dark. It was always my chore to put our chickens away at night once it had gone dark. And if you miss this really crucial time at night, all the chickens will roost in the trees. So then you're out there in pitch black, poking chickens out of trees with brooms, trying to coax them into their coops. Yeah. And meanwhile, you could hear the coyotes, and we had fishers, and yeah. So I was a very scared kid. But then for some reason, I just loved the thrill of it. I'd stay up reading my Goosebumps or watching, or Pet Sematary when I was like 9 or 10, and then I wouldn't sleep the rest of the night. So.
See, now I was a city boy growing up, so like I envy that. Like I wish I could have been scared that way, Like I look out my bedroom window and I just see a bunch of other buildings. And there's just a concrete street outside, so maybe a random tree here and there that someone's dog has peed on as they walk by. But I didn't get to have those fears of nature. So as I got older, I did have a grandma that lived kind of out in the wilderness. So that shit was scary. So I got like the gist of, but you lived it and I just got to visit it. So there was more of a playful, like, hoo tee hee, this is scary kind of thing that, and I could leave and go back home. You lived it, so you were conditioned into it. That's really cool. Though, I mean, I don't want to make fun of your childhood, but that sounded pretty cool. Poking chickens to get them out of the trees, and then like the coyote. Man, that's anxiety right there. The coyotes are out there. They're gonna get me. Oh my god, I gotta get back in the house.
Oh yeah, no, I would definitely play I would just close the chicken coop and then sprint for the door and run as fast as I could.
Well, so as an adult now and taking all of those experiences, which clearly have helped you write this great story for us, have you written any novels? Have you written any short stories? Are you in the horror community writing things? What's up with that right now? Yep,
so mainly short stories and some poetry as well. The latest thing that I had come out before this podcast episode, I had an experimental piece in Ghost Orchid Press's Chlorophobia, which is an eco-horror anthology. Some really great stuff in there, all either flash fiction or poetry from different authors, but all stories around eco horror. So obviously I wrote another plant horror story. And I did in the form of instructions for taking care of this supernatural / potentially hazardous plant. So that was kind of my latest thing. I also co-edited the Proliscariot anthology, going back about a year now. But that was a fantastic anthology of stories, just kind of working class horror stories. That was a really cool project to work on. Like Joe Koch and Haley Piper had stories in there. And and then just kind of short stories here and there. I am trying to work on a longer project right now that I'll kind of not name just yet, but just when I can find the time, just kind of plugging away at a longer project right now.
Do you find that you typically write horror in the vein of like more speculative fiction, as just the average human encountering something, that could most likely, I mean, this invasive plants could definitely take over a town and stuff, and then you just ratcheted that horror up, versus like, giant Godzilla coming through, or, oh god, vampire bat coming and attacking everybody. That's not exactly speculative. How do you typically write your horror stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't thought about it. It's a lot of small town horrors. Definitely I first started, seriously trying to get published, was a lot of creature feature. What's a cool monster that I can put into a small town to attack people and cause chaos. And I've tried to get a little bit more thematic and a little bit more, think about the stuff that actually scares me now. So I love a good creature feature. Like Gremlins is one of my favorite movies of all time. Oh, so
Excellent.
Good. It's
such a classic. Oh yeah. That Santa Claus story always gets me the creeps every time I hear it.
I always forget that it's in there too. I teach high school English. The day before we left for break, I showed it and completely forgot that very dark story of suicide is in that movie, even though I watch it every single year on Christmas Eve.
Right, because it has like no greater part of the plot of Gremlins, but it's such a chilling, self-enclosed mini horror story, just kind of told by one of the characters. It's like a throwaway story. And so you're right, you forget it, but you hear it and you're like, oh shit, I remember that.
Yeah, like a total digression from what we're talking about right now, but if you go and read one of the earlier drafts of the screenplay for Gremlins, and you can find it online, so much darker. Gremlins are not just cute and mischievous. Like, they eat the dog and they decapitate Billy's mother. And so then the story of the dead Santa Claus doesn't seem as out of place.
Right.
I don't know. It still works, but it's still catches me off guard. In terms of the stuff that I write, I kind of just think, what does scare me now? It's kind of the more existential things, like this story. What are the lengths that small town people will go to? Or, something like a degenerative disease, like something like Alzheimer's. I find that to be one of the most terrifying things. So then I think, okay, well, how can I show this through the lens of horror, make something entertaining, but at the same time kind of explore this issue? So that's how I've started in the last 2-ish years writing things, and it definitely adds a lot more depth to the stories for sure. There's nothing like I want to see that movie of a giant scarecrow destroying a town, but then also kind of trying to come up with those more lasting stories too.
Yeah, after I listened to your story, I don't know, a third time, because again, your story is one of those to me where you listen first time, you get it, it's cool. If I had never heard it again, I was satisfied. But I listen again, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm getting a new angle here. I totally get it. Like, I did not really get how actually invasive the plants were. Like, you hear throughout the story, you're slowly introducing the vines are here and there, and the people are very normalized about it. So then even me, listening to the story, I was like, oh, well, that's normal. Listening back a second time, you truly realize how invasive everything was. And you're like, wait a minute, the town folk, and then you start hearing the flashbacks, and then it makes sense if you put them in chronological order, and you're like, wait a minute. And it took me the third listening to realize, oh, wait a minute, she, at the end, was admitting that she knew all along what was happening when she left the town. That was a secret she kept to herself, being infected, I guess, by these pods. And then coming back to the town, and it's such a beautiful ending of just giving herself to the forest. So your characters are so strong. It wasn't just a simple from point A to point B. Monster scared everyone. Everyone ran. Monster's dead. Yay. End of story. It was very impactful. And so after the third time listening, I was like, oh my gosh, Mike Flanagan can make a movie out of this. This is such a brilliant. There's so much here. So we gotta call. I'll call Mike Flanagan after I get off this one. I'll ask
Perfect.
him.
Yeah.
I'll ask him and his wife to do this. So we got.
He's not doing much right now. So
yeah, exactly.
Sure
He's wrapped up on 20 other horror stories he just finished. So we can do 21st.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, though. I kind of wondered, and still do, that ending where physically you see that plant life is in her, right? And she's glowing now. If that was too on the nose or not, right? That these plants had gotten into the townsfolk.
Right. Well, she coughed up the spores or whatnot. She said something was wriggling in her throw up as she was coughing up at the end.
Yeah.
And then the reference, of course, to the glowing, but we know that was a flashback of when she had first been kicked out of the town. So first listen through, I didn't connect all of those dots, and it was not because of you wrote it poorly or anything. It's such an elaborate, I think, slow burn into the conclusion. It's a very rich conclusion that you do have to go back to piece together more to be like, oh, and then that's this part of the conclusion I understand now. It was just very well done. I was very impressed.
Oh, thanks, Brooks.
Yeah, it was absolutely wonderful. As we do come to a close here tonight, I wanted to make sure that you could give out any kind of social medias where people can follow you, find more of your writings, the projects you're connected to.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at Bain Writes. I post on there, and then I also do a somewhat monthly column on Divination Hollow reviews, which is called the Horror Hoser. So each month I look at a Canadian horror book or a movie, and do a review for that. And then the last thing I'll plug is the anthology that I mentioned earlier, Chlorophobia, which is out from Ghost Orchid Press. That's just a fantastic eco-horror anthology. I have a story in there, but there are some bigger names in there as well, like Stephanie Wojtowicz, and just a fantastic collection.
Yeah, it'll be great for people to be able to go out there and find more of your stuff. I already feel like this will be one of those classic. This story for the Grey Rooms will be destined to be a classic. This is going to be an easy story to return to because, again, every time you listen, you're getting different shades. When a flower blooms, right, the petals can fall and then more petals grow, right? So your story is just going to keep growing and evolving. It's all the puns tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it was great of you for joining us tonight, Ian. I appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat, and I thank you for sharing your world with us here in the Grey Rooms.
Thanks, Brooks. Take care.
Thank you. And as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. May you languish, lament, and loathe, but always with love. Hashtag stay gray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Ian.
Take care, folks.
And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition of Behind the Door.